Okay, I get it. As most people said on TikTok, this is completely illegal, and I should absolutely change that. So that was never the plan, to keep this intentionally forever. What I was planning to do eventually was to move this hazard button here to over here on my display mount, build a custom PCB which allows supporting that even if the car is off and everything, so it's a completely separate system to the computer system you see here. And then we go ahead and install that in the car, and it's a completely separate system, it's completely legal, and if the PC system stops working, then the hazard button will still work regardless. So let's quickly try removing this display mount, and I'll take it upstairs to my office space, and we'll see what needs to be done. So this here is my lower control panel, so let me just open this up, and behind this membrane is the hazard light button. It's really hard to do this with one hand. So my plan is to mount this hazard light button roughly here on the control panel, and see, it does actually seem to fit on these two edge walls quite nicely. So that should work. Actually, wait, this bottom arm there should be down, so it should be mounted like this but reversed this way. So I'm just checking if the dimensions fit. So that seems to work really well. So I'm going to do some test prints on my printer with that. Oh, hello. I'm going to do some test prints with that to make sure that I can get this to work up seamlessly. And what I was going to do is I was going to mount on this side two push trigger buttons and a red LED. So obviously you can see the hazard light flash when the hazards are actually on and off. Now, regarding all of this mess here, I thought now would be also a good opportunity to design like some kind of carry case for all these PCBs, so they're not just kind of glued to the back of the LCD monitor, especially this micro here for the touch panel. And I will also design a secondary PCB, which give me 1 second. My plan for the secondary carry-on case board, which will have all the electronics for the hazard light button, as well as some other things, but I'm going to list them on the screen now, because I have some plans for what the back panel control board can do. So it will be in charge of this whole display module, as well as the hazard light button. So it can do stuff like power off the screen, control the screen brightness and stuff. So that'll be interesting to figure out how the backlight system works on this iPad screen. But that board, since I don't like wasting stuff, is, well, a few months ago when I was developing the 1.2 PCB design of my TCU, JLC PCB sent me a incorrect batch with this defect here, whereby you see there's a little bit of the ground plane exposed around every single pin. Now, since I'm going to be doing this wiring my own way, like I'll be mounting the ESP here and then manually soldering wires to it and to MOSFETs here, so I can do what I want with the MCU, but it's all just stacked on a board. I figured I might as well use one of these PCBs, since I have about 50 of them laying around, so we're not wasting anything. And I will try assembling that. So let me just get on with a couple test prints and I'll be back. Here you see me editing my existing display mount to accommodate the cutout for the hazard light button. I noticed when designing this that the hazard button for my control panel is actually tilted slightly, so to accommodate the curve in the E-Class's interior. So I tried to accommodate this in the model such that the hazard buttons will sit flush in the display mount and the display mount will follow the curve of the interior. So after much prototyping, I think this is finally ready. I'm going to make this mount here a bit proper and print that. I'll show that on the screen now as the final design. It will have the holes for the LEDs in the back, but buttons press, it's double redundant, so I can press the top, bottom, corners of it, or the center, and it still triggers the buttons one way or another, and I can push down it really hard without it breaking thanks to this back panel. So I think now it's finally time to print the final case design, like the whole thing, with this cutout on the top. Oh, and also you can see that I've got wire runs for the wires for the buttons. So let's print that. The hazard button is connected directly to the ESP chip and ground, and pressing the button will result in the signal falling to ground, which I'm going to eventually code the ESP to detect. Once I got this sorted, it's now time to reverse engineer the backlight circuit on my HDMI display so that my custom board can control it on demand. I plan to eventually have the backlight react to the car's ambient light sensor, but I'll touch up on this much later in the video. What I have here is I have the LCD backlight driver board connected to the display, so that goes to the iPad monitor, and that goes from the display driver chip on the back of the board. I've got my probe on what I think is the backlight control circuit. So that's connected up to my oscilloscope, which goes over here, and I'm watching the voltage on it because I want to see if I can control it using the same ESP module. And then there is my display. So what I'm planning on doing is this trace here connects up to this little trace here. I'm going to sever that trace and connect that up to an MCU and see if I give it PWM feedback, because it seems to be 3.3 volts on the PWM line, if I can control the screen brightness that way. So let me quickly try doing that. Okay, so with the display running here, what I have done is I've hooked up a red cable to what I think is the MCU backlight control pin, and I've severed the connection here from the big ribbon cable which goes to the HDMI controller to the backlight control circuit, and instead I've put the red wire here. So I've been probing at this end of the backlight controller, and if I do that, you can see on my oscilloscope there's a 360Hz PWM wave, which seems to be backlight control. So the lower edge will rise in duration to signify more backlight off, and when the signal is high, the backlight is on, and it's PWM control for the backlight. So what I intend to do is to connect this red wire up here to the ESP controller via a MOSFET, so I'll connect it here, and then I will try and do that in code and see what happens. Okay, done. So you now see this red wire from the backlight control circuit goes to the MOSFET here, which is fed from the ESP module, and you can see on the display the backlight dimming and then going bright again, which is exactly what I wanted to do in code. And you can see on here what's going on if I turn this off. Actually, one sec, let me just quickly reconfigure my oscilloscope. Here we go. So you can see the PWM wave decreasing so the off time is increasing, implying the display is off during this period and the display is on during this period, and it's doing it at such a high frequency that you don't notice it. So if I go here, that's why it's barely visible. You can't tell that the display is flickering because it's flickering so quickly. But yeah, backlight control works. After completing this, I then did a couple of other minor things. Firstly, I added two LEDs to the back of the hazard button. This allows for a red pulsing light when the hazard button is on, like you see in most cars. And also a white backlight to illuminate the button during the night when it may be too dark in the cabin to see it. I also hooked up the buttons for the HDMI board to the ESP board so that I could maybe control the on-screen display via CAN at a later date. I should also note now that this whole project is open source, and I'll have a link in the video description to the repository that contains the code and schematics for this project. I also designed a custom mounting system to hold all the pieces at the back of the display. Now let's see how the assembly went. I first accidentally made two mounts that didn't fit. On the first attempt, the display supports were causing the hazard button to stick. Oh. I ended up reinforcing the print further by making the edge that the hazard button sits on deeper, measuring against the clearance of the back of the display to the wall of the interior of the car. Whilst I have you guys here watching, I thought I'd mention I do have some videos in the works regarding my TCU, so don't worry, there will be videos on that project coming soon. However, right now, things are super busy with programming the TCU and improving things for users, so most of my spare time these days is spent there, hence why there hasn't really been a video on this channel in a while. Okay, so I'm about to put this in the car, and I just quickly thought I'd mention what I've got going. So I've got this red USB cable out the top of the monitor. That's going to be for debugging, and I can easily just remove it because I still need to write the software for this. Then I've got the CAN wires, which go to our CAN connection down there. Then I've got the power leads, which for now I'm going to leave hanging out so I can connect up to this here outside so I can disconnect it if I need to. And then obviously the touch controller and the HDMI go to the PC. And that should be about it. So let me just flip this monitor back up and then see if it powers up. Well, I've just reinstalled this back into the car and yeah, it broke. So I guess we're going to print this again.
3 days later.
So check this now, it's finally in. I actually had to do 3 more test prints because 2 attempts failed. But now finally, I've got a button which I can push, and now I guess all that we have to do is to program the thing to work correctly. So currently it's just doing a test sequence flashing the hazard light behind the hazard button. But yeah, you can tell I can actually click this and it actually sounds kind of similar to these buttons here, so I'm sort of happy with it. But let's get on to the programming bit now. To start with, I started programming up the power management on the ESP32 chip. The ESP controller should put the whole board to sleep when there is no CAN traffic present, and should wake up if either the hazard button is pressed or if traffic is present on CAN again. Now, since the ESP controller does not support CAN wake up, I had to do things a little bit differently. The GPIO pin for receiving data from the CAN transceiver on the board is high if there is no data, and low if data is being received, so I can make the ESP listen to this pin in its sleep. If the pin switches state to low, then it will be used to wake the ESP module up. This, however, comes with a disadvantage that the first CAN frame received by the ESP which triggered the wake up is lost, but for my use case this is not actually important, so we can do it. So I think I've got most of this sorted now. So if I look at my power supply now, the MCU is off, we're consuming 0.000 amps, so it's below what my power supply can read. I'll do another test later in the car of my actual more accurate multimeter, but this seems to be really good for low power consumption. Now, so currently the system is off. As soon as I press the hazard button, the system wakes up. And it will stay on because the hazard button has been tapped on. Now we can tap the hazard button off. So say for instance you turned off your hazard lights, and then after 5 seconds or so, there you go, the MCU turns itself back off again. Now this is purely happening right now because there's no CAN signal, so let's see if I can do this in one take. And just quickly plug in all my other ECUs on my desk. So we have a functioning CAN network. And I'm going to plug in, so currently note that the MCU is completely off, no fan is spinning, but as soon as I connect CAN low, there we go, you heard it there probably, we've turned it on. So as soon as there's CAN detected, it wakes up, and that's purely because, I might be able to show you this on my oscilloscope, looking at the CAN RX signal, which is this one here, you can see all these dips. That's essentially what's triggering the MCU to wake up. Actually, there's a better image of it. So all those little dips there are CAN packets, and that's causing the MCU to wake up when it sees the first activity on there, because the first packet on the CAN network for this car is not really important, so I can ignore it and then read all the other packets coming in. But yeah, this is looking really good now. And then of course, just to add to that, if I now disconnect CAN to simulate the bus going completely off because the car stops talking, and we wait 5 seconds. There we go. Turns off. So yeah, power management works now. So let's go implement this in the car. The next thing to do is to change the red LED to pulse in sync with the hazard lights on the car, rather than staying on when the hazard button is pressed. This can be done as the signal module in the front of the car responsible for pulsing the hazard lights sends out a signal to the car to show how long it is pulsing the hazard lights for. So I programmed the ESP to listen to this data and pulse the hazard light in sync with the data on CAN. So here I'm sending the CAN frame on socket CAN, so 00E is the CAN ID for the SAM signal, which tells the rest of the car if the hazard lights are flashing or not, and then 20 implies the hazard lights are set, and then 40 implies the time which they are going to stay on for. 00 here would 00 in this bit here would imply that the hazard lights have now been turned off. And if we go over to the control panel, you can now see the red LED is blinking in sequence to that. So this is now working, so we now have signal. Lastly, I wrote some code that allows the ESP32 to constantly send CAN data if the ignition switch ECU sees the key in the ignition switch, but stops sending data when the key is removed unless the hazard button is active. If the ESP32 kept sending data when the key is off, then all the other ECUs on the CAN network would never sleep, causing a major battery drain. So, moment of truth. So currently my dash cam is off. This is connected to the PC in the back, so when the PC wakes up due to CAN activity, this will turn on, you will hear it. And currently the whole car is asleep, nothing is plugged in, no key, And if I just tap the hazard button, let's see what happens. There you go, and you can see the dash cam turning on now. And then you can see here, if you give it a minute, there's the PC coming online. Ignore the fact the backlight is flickering, I'm still doing some experiments with the backlight. But there we go, PC is up and running now. And then if we press the hazard light button, you see the hazard light is also flashing in sync with this. Now if we turn off the hazard light button, and we wait a few minutes, the PC and everything should go back to sleep again because the bus turns off. Okay, maybe I need to fix why that's rebooting. There we go. That's completely turned off, so now CAN bus is dead. And if we give it about 30 more seconds, that should also turn off. But there we go, it works beautifully now. Now that the display module is in the car, I was able to write some additional code which allows the display to change its backlight depending on what the ambient light sensor in the car is saying. So for instance, if the light sensor is detecting it's daytime outside, the display will be at maximum brightness, and if the light sensor is detecting it's nighttime outside and all the lights are on in the car, then the display automatically will dim itself. Time for a test. So what I've done is the display is currently on, CAN is awake because I've got the key in the ignition switch to keep everything alive, and I'm seeing here what the light sensor on the top of the car here is showing me. So we're showing we are in daytime mode, which is 0 here, and it's detecting we're not in a tunnel. Now if I take this rag I have here and quickly whack it on top of the sensor and go back inside, you should see in a bit the display dimming. Because now it's detecting it's dark outside, and that's because we are in a tunnel because the light level suddenly changed. So let's do the opposite and remove it from here. And if we go back in, we should see the display brighten back up as soon as that state changes. There we go, we're back to being bright display again. So adaptive backlight on the display now works beautifully. Now everything is working, it's time to modify my digital control panel software. Rather than the digital software sending the lower control panel frame, it now sends a custom CAN frame over to the display module. The display module will then send the lower control panel frame, which now contains data about the hazard button, as well as if any of the other buttons on the virtual panel were pressed. You can see here the old architecture versus the new architecture. I think we have finally actually completed this project as far as I'm concerned, so obviously the backlight works and everything. And before you ask how I've been remoting into my PC in the trunk, is actually via this cable. So my laptop here sets off an Ethernet connection. It basically acts as a DHCP router, which my PC in the back connects to, and then I can SSH into it, and so you can see that I'm SSHing into it. But anyway, to show you this, so you've got the hazard light button working, and that's working right now. And if I press the blind button, the blind comes up, and vice versa. I can tap it and it will come down. The delay isn't actually too bad considering it's sending, the PC is, first of all, the software on here is reading the data, then sending it to USB, then USB sending it to the PC, then the PC sending it to this, and then this is sending it to the rest of the car. It's actually not too bad, like, look. There you go. The status here to say 321 is actually coming from the seat heater ECU, so it's not actually from the lower control panel. The lower control panel just reads the status from the seat heater. So again, if I turn the cooler on, like, it's not bad. And then I can obviously lock and unlock. See, it's really, really quick to do it. Now there's just one last thing that I want to do, and that's now where the hazard button used to be on my virtual display is now an empty canvas. Let me think of how to make the most depressing display possible, given the current price of fuel and the fact that I own a V8. Give me 1 second.
3 days later.
You know, I've always wanted to see exactly how much fuel this car consumes in terms of money and real-time usage as I'm driving on the motorway. So this will give me a really good opportunity to see that. I'm currently put my ultimate NAG TCU in race mode, so the shifts are extremely quick. That's what's showing on the top display here, is the pressures in the gearbox. But yeah, consuming about 100 mils a minute, so not actually too bad, 15 pence a minute, so it's really not too bad, but there'll be a huge difference as we get onto the motorway, because I will just put my foot down up to the speed limit. And here we go, approaching the motorway. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Sorry about the length of this video. There's so much more that I want to say about what's been going on in this project. Maybe I'll do a blog post or another video about it, because there is a lot more than I spoke about in this video which goes on to make this work. I just covered the basics. Now, just before I leave and end this video, just to prove the people who are going to say, would this not work if the PC is offline? Well, let's quickly test that. So I'm going to take the key out. I've got the key with me. Let's go outside, go to my trunk, and just unplug power to the PC. So you see everything's on right now, and we're just going to disconnect power. So there we go, the whole system is off now. That's not going to work again. And let's go quickly back inside here, and again, with no key being on there, let's just whack the hazards on. Brilliant, it works. If I put the key on, the tone of the hazard lights changes, just like in the stock system. So essentially the reason why they do that is this way it saves a little bit more power if the key is out of the ignition switch. But that'll be about it for this video, so I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in another one. So goodbye for now.